Hello, everyone. My name is David Rock. I'm at the University of Maryland in Baltimore, here in Baltimore, Maryland, and welcome to Cytometry NR. So, this is going to be one of the pre-course walkthrough tutorials talking about how to set up your GitHub account. The reason we're using GitHub is one, we are a Cytometry NR course, and we are focusing in on teaching everyone how to code. Now, many bioinformaticians, as well as software developers, use GitHub for places where they can keep and store their code until they need it. And it's also a good place to manage interactions with each other for the course, given the number of virtual participants. So we'll be using our GitHub course repositories discussion page kind of as a community forum. So in addition of being able to connect it to our local computers and being able to pass code back and forth, it's one of those situations that everybody should set up an initial GitHub account. So when we are first working with code, it is very important that we stay organized. Ultimately, we want to avoid being in a scenario where we need some code, we wrote it at some point last month, and we're having to search through multiple R files that are scattered across multiple folders, several external hard drives, as well as both our personal computers and our work computers in order to find what we are looking for. Similarly, we are trying to avoid ending up with a scenario, which is what we are often encounter when writing, when we have multiple different drafts that get saved under slightly similar sounding names. All the while, we have to search through all of them to find something that we have long since forgotten how to do. So, if we're looking at a PhD comics strip, this is very much a scenario that, even though this is how we operate in our regular writing lives, we should try to, as much as possible to avoid when it comes to our code base. So ideally, when we are thinking how should we organize things to be more or to keep our coding workflow going, is we should try to keep all the coding scripts, everything that we need to run a coding script, present within a project-specific folder. This ensures that should something happen to our computer, we would still be able to have access to those scripts later on. This also is a situation where if we are trying to keep things reproducible and replicable, we would be able to just transfer that folder containing all the data, all the scripts, everything that's needed to run that code successfully, and we'd be able to, with relatively little adjustments, be able to get it to run on somebody else's computer. Similarly, there's an advantage of if you have made changes to your script and your code has stopped working, it's no longer giving you the expected output, i.e. it breaks, having a record of what changes have been made since the last time you had a working version helps you be able to pinpoint as far as what has changed within those code and be able to fix the situation. So oftentimes when your script stops working, it's due because there's a typo in a function name, or you accidentally left a comma somewhere that you were unaware of. If you have a record of the changes that have happened to your code since you started working on it, you'll be better able to quickly figure out what's going on and be able to adjust accordingly. For these reasons, in the course, we'll be using version control software Git from the very beginning. So for this reason, we also will have you set up a GitHub account, which will allow you to back up your coding projects online and keep them as private repositories. Not only is this helpful because you have them off of your computer should something happen to your computer, but then if you're working across multiple workstations and need to bring in code that's changing over time, you can just send all your changes you do remotely send all your changes remotely from one computer, go back to the house or wherever you're going to access the second computer, and just bring in all that same set of code to your local computer and work on it there. That way you avoid having multiple versions of the same set of code, and you avoid being in that scenario where you have multiple files, multiple similarly named files, trying to desperately figure out where previous you 2 months ago left the code that you need to work with. Additionally, the advantage of having a GitHub account, and especially in the context of Cytometry in R, which is being managed off a public GitHub repository, is that when we make changes throughout the week, adding in new material for the upcoming week, making bug fixes, fixing typos, other things of that sort, you'll be able to quickly retrieve all that new information at the beginning of the next week by simply clicking a couple buttons, mainly syncing your forked version of the Cytometry in R repository, as well as then bringing that forked version, i.e. the carbon copy, locally to your own computer where you're able to work with it. So in this walkthrough, we'll be focusing in on how to get your GitHub account set up to make sure that you're familiar with some of the elements within what you see on the website, as well as the locations that you'll be going back to throughout the course in order to find things that may be needed. So with that, let us begin. So the very first step we need to do is we need to set up our own GitHub account. So the very first thing we need to do is we need to navigate to the GitHub homepage. So if this is the first time getting to using GitHub, you'll need to go for this little sign up to GitHub button. And then once it pops up, you need to set up a GitHub account. So picking a GitHub user account name is pretty important because GitHub allows you to also host personal websites. So if you want to do a personal portfolio of projects that you've been working on, you can reference that. If you send your code and make it reproducible and replicable and you list it in a manuscript, your GitHub account will be within that repository URL that's present in the manuscript. So as much as possible, try to keep the name professional, just because then that way you can use it for a lot of different projects down the road beyond just what we're doing today for cytometry in our course. So once you are figuring out an initial GitHub account that you want to use as far as a name, you'll need to provide some information, typically your email address as well as a strong password, and provide a little bit additional information about your country or region, and just go ahead and select create an account. Now, just as a reminder, you're using the free tier for GitHub. You're not paying for anything. It's literally just a free tier GitHub account that you'll be signing up for. So once you have entered your new account information and provided that extra information, you're going to get a code sent to your email address just so you're able to authenticate and make sure your account is active to try and keep out all the spam bots. So please prove that you are human. And once you have copied and pasted in the code, you can proceed, at which point your account will now be created and you'll be able to see a login page, at which point enter in your password and your GitHub account and then proceed. Now, if you're starting off for the very first time, you'll end up on a GitHub profile page that looks kind of like this, and it's a little bit blank. So in the context of this course, I want to walk you through, first off, what are the main elements of a GitHub account, but then I also want you to fill in some personal details for your GitHub accounts so that when you're interacting with other people in the course, you're not just a faceless little icon. So we'll go through these step by step, and then we'll see how this merges together to form a more cohesive profile later on. So first off, I will need you guys to navigate to the far upper right side of the screen, and you'll see this little default profile picture. If you go ahead and select that one, you'll get to an option of selecting your profile, which will then navigate to a page that looks something like this one. So when you land on this page, what I'll have you do is you're going to go for this edit profile option that's on the left side of the screen, and this will just be kind of like the basic drop-down editing of your profile. There's a more thorough view, which you'll see in a couple of minutes. So once you do this and select our edit profile, what you're going to need to do is fill in a little bit of information. So in the case of the GitHub repository for this course, what we did is we provided information as far as our university, the University of Maryland, Baltimore. This is University of Maryland Greenbound Comprehensive Cancer Center. This is the Flowcuts course Cytometry shared resource, as well as linked our different websites, our YouTube channel, other bits of social media. So you'll edit in accordingly, similar to what you would have for your day-to-day basis. And once that's done, we'll navigate back up to the upper right side of your screen, and we'll go and select the actual profile. We're going to go for the settings option at this stage. And this screen will be a little bit more complicated. You can provide a little additional information, kind of similar to what we had on that first landing page. You can also enter your ORCID ID. So if you have an ORCID ID, go ahead and enter that. And once that's done, what we need to do is go down to where it's the contributions and activity portion, which is about halfway down the screen if you scroll. And we're going to encounter this little checkbox, which is left unchecked originally by default. So basically what we're trying to do is I want you guys to have a good visual example of how you have progressed over time. So on your GitHub landing page itself, there's like this little calendar view of contributions. So let me scroll back up and you'll see it. So right now, if you just created a brand new GitHub account, there's not very much there. There's just an initial contribution. This graph is only filled in with activities when it's something that's published to a public repository. However, when we are down here and we select that tick mark and we are able to say include your private contributions on your profile, What this enables is that anything that you're doing within a private repo, meaning the code is not shared with other, the activity is counted towards your graph so that you are able to see how much activity you've had as far as coding progress over time. So I would like everyone to go ahead and select that option just to make it a little bit easier for you to see how you progressed over the course in time. And then you can leave the other options pretty much as default. Not much of this needs to be adjusted. All right. So with this set, you'll be returned to your profile, and you'll see a view that kind of is like this. In our case, when we're filling out the course website a couple months ago, you can see we have filled in now our details. We're no longer a nameless blob on the side. We have our initial contribution activity graph before we started uploading all the course material, so we can see this here. And there's a couple like announcements as far as like big changes that have happened to your repo on GitHub. So in this case, you can see there's a join GitHub announcement displayed on the bottom of the page. So, since we're just starting off, everything looks very bland, so let's make some changes as we go. Namely, we can have additional edit room if we include a readme repository, which will allow us to edit and customize things, make it a little bit more personalized. So that's going to be our next goal for our GitHub account. Now, to do this, what we're going to need to do is navigate up to the upper right-hand side of our screen, and we're going to aim for this little plus sign that's up there on the side. So once we have selected this, what we can do is then go for the option of create a new repository, which is a couple lines down from the dropdown. Once we have opened this, what we're going to need to do is we need to name a repository with the exact same name that we use for our GitHub account. When you do this, what happens is GitHub is able to recognize this as being a special kind of repository, i.e., which is going to serve as the readme.markdown for your profile landing page, which will then proceed to add in all the files that you actually require. So once you have made sure this is identical, you can keep all these other settings same. Just make sure that it is public so that others are able to visualize it, as well as include the option of show or readme. And then you can skip the add, get, ignore, and add license options for the time being. All right. So once you have created this README repository, which has the exact same name as your GitHub user account, you're going to see this options pop in here, and it's going to look fairly bland. You can see the license file has populated. There's now a readme.markdown file that's present. And also on the right-hand side of your screen, you have an option to do the edit the README file directly. So you're going to select that green button, and you're going to press enter. And what you're going to end up in is a screen that looks something like this. So once you get on the screen, you're working within a markdown file, which we'll learn more about how to customize these and tailor these as we go throughout the course. But what you can do for now is just basically grab all this text that's currently there, remove it. And what I would like you to fill it in with some basic information for the course is basically I would like you to know your location. So in our case, we're in Baltimore, Maryland, here in the United States. Our favorite fluorophore, or if you're doing mass cytometry, what's your favorite metal isotope? So in our case, it's Spark Blue 550. If you have any previous coding experience, please list it. In our case, before we started coding, it was most often the form of repeatedly calling IT. And then tell us what you're hoping to get from the course. So in our case, for a lot of the people taking the course, it may be something like a faster way to match FlowSum clusters to their likely cell type. For a few of the people working here at the Flow Core, it's being able to maintain our automation pipelines over long periods of time as staff changes over. So, or just being able to understand what's going on in these different figures that you may see. So whatever it is the reason that you're taking the course, please go ahead and give us a small overview. And once this is done, this is an example of what this looks like when we're looking at it on our page. When we include the little hashtag symbols, we're basically adding in larger font headers that can help separate out. You'll see this when we actually see what this looks like. If you want to preview what it looks like now, you can hit this little preview option and navigate back and forth between both of these. If you want to include URL links, the way you do this is basically you do the little square brackets and then followed by the actual URL within the parentheses. And this is kind of an example of what you can do. And now once you're ready, you'll go ahead and hit commit changes. We'll talk about what a commit actually means later on in the course. But for now, what I want you to do is basically write a small description of what changes you have made to this file. So the GitHub suggestions go something like this: initial README update, and then once in here, just fill in a little bit of details of what you have customized, at which point you can just go ahead and hit commit changes. Now, with this done, you'll see the preview view appear again. But what I really need you to do is go back up here to where your GitHub user account is showing, and go ahead and click on that one. And this will navigate you back to your profile. So all this little README file that you just edited is basically now what you're seeing here. So this gives you a whole lot more space that you can customize and tailor to your own personal preferences. So you just have to include for the course just a little couple questions just so we know that yes, you're participating. But then also if you're using this as your own profile, you're showing off the different projects that you can do, you can heavily customize and modify and personalize this in many ways that you would feel are useful. All right, now that you have the GitHub repository set up, you are now able to see the README. You are now going to be able to do a lot of different things. So the next part that you actually need to do for the course is you need to fork, which is basically carbon copy our course repository to your own GitHub account. This will allow you to both bring it locally to your own computer, as well as make changes and be able to submit the homeworks later on. Now, if you're navigating to our GitHub account is UMG-CCC-FCSR. And when you go here, you're going to go and find the Cytometry in R folder. And you're going to go ahead and click on that. And what you're going to get to see is something that looks roughly like this. So if you're navigating our course repository for the first time, here's a few tabs that you should be aware of because you'll be circling back to them over time throughout the course. So when you're looking to have questions, ask questions about something that's not working or that's unclear, or if you want to interact with other people in the course and discuss things at more depth, we'll be using this little discussion page that is basically a community forum. So if you're having any of those kind of situations, this is the tab that you'll be navigating towards. The Issues tab is also adjacent here. This is more a situation where it's not something that you don't quite understand. It's more a verified issue with our code that's not working across many different people's computers, at which point we need to address that, update the course code to make sure that nobody else runs into that bug again. So we'll discuss when to open an issues page during the how to get help section of the pre-course walkthrough. Additionally, what you'll be able to see is if you see over here, we have a pull request tab. This tab is where you'll go if you want to submit the optional take-home assignments in order to get personalized feedback from the course instructors. Additionally, kind of similar to what you would see on other social media, there's options within GitHub to kind of like star a repository, which kind of serves in a way as a like. The main useful side feature of this is more when you star a repository, you're able to see it in a drop-down menu from your actual GitHub account profile. So the way I use this in daily practice is if I find an interesting cytometry package somewhere on GitHub, and I want to be able to remember what's the name, who wrote it, a couple weeks from now, just because I tend to be forgetful, I'll often go ahead and start at repository so it's present on that drop-down list where I'm able to access it again later in the future. So if you're looking at it, for example, you can find this same menu by going up to the upper right hand on your screen, and instead of going to Profile Repositories, you go to this little star option. And if you're checking like right now, the only thing you really have present at this point in time, if you do star our course repository, will be the repository name right about here. Now, if you're just getting started, and now that you have your GitHub account set up, now that you have edited the README file so that you have a little bit more customization to your GitHub profile, the next step as far as the GitHub account setup process is you need to fork our Cytometry in R folder. So the way you do this is if you're on our GitHub account for the course, you'd see this option up here for the button that says fork. Fork is basically being able to carbon copy it over to make it available on your own personal GitHub. You're going to go ahead and select that option, at which point it's going to bring it over and you're going to have a screen that looks like this. Now, for our course, we ask you not to change the repository name. It'll make things simpler as far as bringing in the weekly updates to the data each and every time. But the main thing you need to ensure is that you're only copying over the main branch, so that way any changes that are happening to the website itself or all the homeworks that other people are submitting don't crowd up your own hard drive space on your own computer, so that it doesn't count against you. And with that, you'll go ahead and create your fork. And basically the idea behind the fork is everything that we update as far as the course website, all the new materials for the next week, will generally start being available on Sundays around 10 o'clock Eastern Time, 10 p.m. Eastern Time. So basically, if you're GMT 0, it'd be Monday at 0300 hours. This way, at that point, you'd be able to bring in that data set to your own computer. And this is what it looks like if you were forking a repository. So you'll see basically, you'll still have the repository name, but then you'll see this is a fork from the original GitHub. So, like I said, there's also the repositories tab. So if you go to your own GitHub account profile and now you click on repositories, previously the only repository that you would have had was the one we created for the README file. But after you have forked it, what you should be able to see is now you have both projects present, which is what you need to have set up at the end of the GitHub account process. Which is what I just covered over the last couple of slides. So now we should have a GitHub account set up and we should be ready to go. Every pre-course walkthrough, as well as each week's material, I provide additional resources in case you're trying to find out more about the topic. So the Git and GitHub tutorial for scientists is a really good paper, describes kind of the rationale as far as the reproducibility and replicability standpoint, why you should start incorporating some of these practices into your own workflow. There's also some really good resources just aimed at general software development and bioinformatics. So 10 simple rules for taking advantage of GitHub are one of these resources. As well as you want to start learning a little bit more about how version control works, a brief introduction to Git for beginners is a good resource, as well as there's a good YouTube video as far as how to use GitHub, which goes over some points similar to what we just covered. And with that, I appreciate your time. I hope the audio came out well. This is a testing stream. We're trying to make sure everything is set up properly for the course itself. The last recording of the same material turned out really bad on the audio, so I hope this one turned out because I really don't want to have to record it a third time. And with that, I thank you for your time, and I will see you during one of the weekly live streams this upcoming week.